Hey, ladies and gentlemen, Spazzy Dragon here, aka Syndromes, and welcome back to Meet a Faction. Today, I am currently floating around in this beautiful freaking system that I've never seen in my life before, and with me, floating right there in front of me, is the Undertone, the current leader and the creator of the DTR deterrence. Say hello to the peeps.
Hello there, my name is Undertone, or known in RP as Ravenna Nagash. Thank you for having me, and I appreciate doing this with you.
Cheers, dude. Sorry again for the long wait. Life has been interesting.
Isn't it
So,
all for everyone? Yeah.
no kidding. All right, so I'll be completely honest with you. You are, to date, in every single reincarnation of this series, the newest player in terms of how long you've been on the server itself. So, usually I would say start talking about, who you are, what you have done, but this time around I'm actually curious, how did you end up finding disco and how did you end up like remaining on disco? Because players finding the mod is not has never really been a problem for us. It's more about the player retention. So do tell us what we need to do. How did you survive?
Well, I do agree with you completely on this. It's kind of a very difficult process. Just maybe as a caveat, I did play Discovery maybe about 10, 15 years ago, but I only stayed for like less than a month. So it was a very short time, a month. I didn't really do anything in terms of the forum. I didn't really kind of interact with a lot of people. So it was a very independent experience. I don't remember most of it, and it's pretty safe to say that generally September was my start date. So I couldn't really remember anything. Very short experience. So I joined generally in September 2021. I would say that this type of games are very niche. You really don't have a lot of games like that on the market. So generally, I was looking for a space sim, something similar to Star Citizen. And by searching for Star Citizen, I really wasn't impressed, to be honest, with Star Citizen and the development. But that's an entire topic on its own.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah. So generally speaking, I did remember. Hey, actually, the guy that made Star Citizen also made Freelancer, which is something that I checked out. Maybe 10 years ago. I checked some other games, but nothing really sticked out to me. So I did some research and I checked Reddit to see if Discovery is still alive, and apparently it was. So I did download it, and that's how it started. I generally like science fiction, and there's very few games that fit within the space simulator kind of a niche, but Freelancer really does. So this is kind of the start point of how I came to Discovery.
And how did you end up with the Corsair ID?
So this is actually an interesting question. When I came in September, I generally started on my own. It was a very grueling experience. I didn't remember anything about the IDs, the role play requirements, the server rules, anything like that. I actually applied for some groups under a different alias. I was unfortunately not accepted into any because either they were recruiting only experienced players or they were just doing this long, arduous process of forum application, for which when I tried to apply for a forum, it took like 24 hours. And generally, it was a very, at least in my perspective, a very convoluted and complicated process. For joining a group. So I didn't unfortunately make it into any single group. I didn't have actually any intention of making my own group. So ironically, I could have been just a regular pilot for some other group right now, and things would have taken a completely different turn. So um, I always like unlawful. So generally, in other RPGs or in other games that I play, I kind of don't like the stereotypical type of, let's say, cliche hero that's lawful good, does everything right. I generally like more ambiguous type of characters, and so that actually prompted me to explore what unlawful factions are there. Because Saber is actually my favorite ship in the game, I was naturally predisposed to check out Outcasts. And obviously, the Cardamine is a very big reference to Dune's spice.
Yeah.
So it goes without saying that that was kind of interesting for me. But fundamentally, I stopped with Corsairs because it was just an area which at the time was very unexplored. I really didn't see any people in Gamma or in the area at the time. So that's kind of what prompted me to specifically choose Corsairs.
So that's actually kind of interesting. Usually, I see players gravitate towards hotspots of activity. So you going for something that is not active is kind of interesting. Actually, it's
Yeah,
definitely out of the norm.
I would say so. Generally, I was very interested in kind of seeing what's out there. I mean, it kind of is in the name discovery. So for me, it was really kind of going to uncharted spaces and see what's generally out there. And I couldn't really remember anything from 10 years ago. So it was kind of a I actually first traveled with a freelancer ship, and I made it to Gamma. I didn't kind of spot any players, and I think that's on account of the player base kind of dwindling in the past year or so. But yeah, generally that kind of prompted me, and I was thinking, okay, how can I work as an operations manager in real life, and so for me, the question was, how can I utilize that space? Is there anything interesting that I can do with it, or maybe cover a niche, create maybe a faction, and move from there? So that was kind of the initial turn of why I actually, and also part of it was because I was really, I wouldn't say disappointed, but I just thought, is there an easier way that I could do a faction with an easier recruitment process? And so that was kind of my initial thoughts of maybe starting just my own kind of thing.
Yeah, while avoiding the pitfalls that you yourself personally went through when dealing with the more established factions. That's
Yeah,
actually
absolutely.
amazing. I love that sort of story. Very very similar to actually what I personally actually also went. Although I ended up with the Outcast, by the way, but I also went there with a freelancer ID and
Oof.
kind of got kind of got adopted. But yeah, so tell us about Deterrence. Why the name? Why the what is it basically? Like
Okay.
what kind of niche does it serve right now?
So basically for me was I think there's a huge distinction between NRP and ORP. These are two separate elements when I was building the faction. So maybe generally just to kind of outline what it actually is. So generally Deterrence is now the currently the largest and most active group on the server, and it has been since its creation in September 2021. So again, we are a relative newcomer to the server by Disco standards, even more so. We have been controversial. That's putting it lightly in some regards. First of all, there's a lot of myths about our creation. So some people, first of all, thought that I'm an out of some older members, or that we are remnants of various other groups that have existed, which is not the case, obviously. Some people actually thought that I'm Lemon in an out account, which is funny because then I actually met the actual Lemon, so we had some interesting interactions. Um, I do actually represent other communities, so I'm part of a few big communities in terms of Overwatch and Battlefront. So Star Wars Battlefront, I mean, and
Yep.
so a lot of people thought that, for example, I've brought in other communities, which was the case for a very very small percent, like maybe 1%. But generally, I opted out not to do what we call server raids because server raids are generally they leave a mess. They're not
Yeah,
really
we
healthy.
we actually had that. We actually had that happen with a prominent YouTuber. I think it was Blue Drake or someone like that. Well, not prominent, but a yeah, that basically happened, and that was an interesting experience for a couple of weeks. A lot of bans happened, but yeah, yeah.
It's not a long term, let's say. I mean, it can be interesting if done well, but I really didn't want to opt out this way because I didn't want to bring like, let's say, 100 people and just they all lock DTR, and then I mean already DTR is the biggest group, and that's entirely done by actual recruitment in the game or in Discord. So actually 95% of the people in DTR have been recruited in the game or in the Discord. They are not coming from other servers. Probably this is kind of a next point. We are actually very aggressive recruiters. In fact, I think we got into a little bit of a trouble in the Discord. But I personally think that it's part of the groups to kind of lead by example and to seek out players, particularly new players, and so we recruit strongly in game and in the other various discords and outside actually. um, a lot of people were actually skeptical and they thought that we'll be gone by 2 weeks because of this approach, because apparently
It's been done before, and that's
yeah,
usually the the result. But
I think that though for me it was the onboarding process that we have, which is I would say it's a very smooth one. So I think the results speaks for themselves. I mean, we've been the most active and largest since September without a break. And so while other groups, let's say, focus on veterans, or they focus only on like people that have been for, let's say, 5 or 10 years or whatever, we primarily actually focus on newcomers for various different reasons. Mostly because it's good for the server health, I would say, because you will find that attrition in discovery is
The turnover
higher.
rate is
Yeah,
high.
it's huge. It's huge, and we've actually had amazing feedback from people that have started freelance have discovery for, let's say, multiple times, and then they quit within the first 2 weeks. But then they come to DTR and they stay for long.
Exactly. People need an anchoring point, and if you have a very accepting, very active roleplay community, or just a group in general, people will remain a lot more. And
Absolutely,
I can tell you from my personal experience, I know exactly what you mean. Some of the more established roleplay groups or PvP groups in Discovery Freelancer, they obviously will attempt to opt for the proven members, established members, especially when there's been a lot of controversy, a lot of drama in the past, X amount of years where, there's people you don't want to have in your group. There's a lot of face control, basically. So
absolutely.
having a group, I can imagine. I am currently sitting here imagining how might it feel for a established a 10-year-old veteran player who is also a faction member or faction, in a faction's high command, and then comes along this, new player, just makes a group and everything works, and suddenly, wait, stop! That's not supposed to be done.
Yeah, it was very hard. There's a lot of gatekeeping, I would say, and there's a lot of but I don't want to definitely paint it in a completely negative experience. It's definitely incredibly challenging onboarding experience to just to come to discovery. But I want to say that there have been people that have actually been helpful and encouraging in terms of the things that we do. So I don't want to paint it as a completely negative experience, but you definitely need to have a very challenging type of personality to persevere in the face of
Yeah,
that. And I think you also mentioned a very interesting point, and that's the veterans themselves. They have a very set in stone opinions about a lot of things, and particularly about people. And so part of the reason why I recruit primarily new players is because I don't want that to permeate in the faction. I want people to generally stay classy, generally to kind of have really a positive outlook on things, and to really have a healthy outlook on the game and on the people. So generally, a lot of people would, for example, tell me, "Oh, you need to, not engage with that person or this person because X, Y, Z." And then I find that on a whole, a lot of the people are actually people and with their own faults and plus and side and negatives. So it's just a give or take, and you need to have a kind of an open mind to who you deal with. And so having new players is easier in this way because you're not constantly, let's say,
you're not a part of the established ecosystem, so
yeah, exactly.
they are much easier to integrate because it's a kind of like a discovery for both sides, even like the faction leader and the faction itself. I This is an interesting, I'm currently smiling. I'm like grinning like a complete doofus right now because you are the exact opposite of what disco has been in my eyes for the last 10 years, and it is amazing
I'm
to
glad to
see
hear
this
that.
actually works. Oh, I can imagine the amount of salt you're generating. It's actually
Yeah,
pretty fun.
it's been tricky, yeah, for sure. Speaking of that, exactly. I mean, we've been called the horde or the swarm because generally, particularly in the beginning, we really used our numbers and we used choke points. And Disco has this really interesting, bizarre chivalry code, and that's loosely used kind of whenever it's convenient or
Whenever it's
balances.
yeah, whenever it's
Yeah,
convenient. That's yes. Go on.
it's a very interesting, like, I just to give you a perspective, I come from StarCraft, and I used to be a master in during the Heart of the Swarm era, so very quickly when it comes to engagements. My thought processes in terms of strategically how to win in a nutshell. I'm competitive, and being competitive is what got DTR to where it is. But balance is not only done in terms of numbers, and so it's very interesting how here the code is that you always have to balance in
Yes.
RP even. The numbers, and let me preface this to be very clear that I'm fundamentally very much in agreement that things need to be balanced in terms of matchmaking, right? Like you cannot have one side stomp the other constantly, and so I very much agree in events, and DTR has been striving to make community events with other factions to have that equal level. But it's an interesting dichotomy because you always in role play you want to balance the engagements, right? But it doesn't that contradict with the RP nature of the server, because in reality, if you were truly properly role playing, you wouldn't let your brothers and sisters or like compatriots die just for the sake of balance in RP. So
Of course.
it's a
But
very interesting dichotomy. Yeah,
it's actually perfectly fine that you use the term chivalric code here, because that is kind of the like honestly, you are by far not the first faction who has had numbers on their side, and usually the chivalric code is probably the only reason that keeps these things alive, because it's kind of like an ecosystem. From speaking from experience, for example, the outcasts. I can only speak from Outcast point of view because I was actively a part of that community for a while. We ended up killing the Taos simply because we had the mass, we had the pop. It wasn't really a malicious intent, but basically we starved ourselves of in-game content in the form of player interaction simply because the CR, the IMG at the time, they got so fed up with getting shot that they just stopped logging in. They moved to like the Rhineland, the Omegas, for example, right?
yeah,
And it see the thing is, if you don't actively try to do the chivalric thing, it kind of balances itself out on its own, one
agreed.
way or the other. And if it's the other, then it usually kind of, well, not kind of, but it definitely hurts the server environment. The only problem is that some people like to weaponize the concept itself, and as you
Mm.
actually said, they will use it when it benefits them. But I'm glad to hear that you are aware of this as a new player, because the past experiences is that they basically these new arrivals would say, "Well, I don't see you doing it, so if you're not doing it, I'll do it better than you, and I'll take your place." Right? Is that sort of thing, and
No, I think you're
usually,
absolutely right. Yeah,
and it usually resulted in the faction actually getting stomped by the rest of the server. The veteran players would just band together and just stomp them out of existence. But the fact that that you're still here, that this is working, tells me either A, you are doing it in a way that doesn't require them to actually band together, or that ISCO is just too small to actively complete against you. But I'm, you know,
it's an
it's
interesting
a
take.
joke,
Yeah.
but still.
I mean, I definitely changed my approach over time, because when I first started, it was for me it was a strategy, right? And it was kind of thinking it from that perspective. And the strategic approach doesn't really work here. You really need to, and I absolutely can echo that. I mean, in terms of let's say our anniversary, which was recently, we managed to field like over 20 players on a 40 server players total. So
Yeah,
we were basically what, like 60-70% of the server. And I'm not really interested in like killing out all the competition, because at the end of the day, if you kill all the competition, very rightfully you have if you take out the everyone from the sandbox, you have no one else to play with, and
exactly.
so yeah, it's a very kind of you need to give and take, and a lot of this approach needs to be taken with other rational actors, like talking to the one ICs of other factions and kind of making sure that you know um, you balance things out. So we've definitely taken strides to kind of incorporate that, particularly when we fight in our home systems, because it's a very difficult thing to actually balance. How do you balance across numbers? how do you balance across skills, because at the end of the day we're all new players, and a new player will never have a chance against an experienced
And
player.
at the same time, no one wants to lose. So,
Exactly,
everyone
exactly.
wants balance, but they want to win. So, where does that stop? Before we start moving on to the next topics, out of curiosity, you are trying to reach out to the veteran players, to the veteran leaders, and, attempt to balance these things. Has the reception worked?
In some cases, yeah. In others, not so much.
Without naming, without
Yeah, of
naming.
course, of course. So let's say most of the time, so 90% of the time, I would say that I've dealt with people that are quite easy to kind of navigate. We had one particular incident, Jerry, which kind of resulted actually exactly in what you mentioned. So we had a huge coalition against us, which tried to siege our the Turn Sanctum, the base that we have in Gamma, and it was honestly the highlight of my, let's say, career, if I can put it this way, because it was huge battles on an hourly basis. It was at least nothing until I've ever seen in the server. Probably other people that are for longer time here than me have seen something like that. But it was like generally 25 to 25 of Corsairs versus Outcasts and Core. And then we had Oxu in the mix. We had like Coalition in the mix. It was crazy. But to answer the question, generally, um, I would say it requires perseverance, and it requires to kind of kill your ego in a bit, because at the end of the day, the other person is, striving to really bring his faction forward. And I don't mean in the sense of like putting the achievements of the faction first, but generally, being a faction leader is a very responsible role, and
And
part of
there's
that
always legacy as well.
exactly, yeah, and part of that responsibility is, finding the balance between utilizing what your players want, because at the end of the day, if you don't really pursue what you guys want, then the whole concept is going to fall in itself. But then on the other hand, how do you pursue that in a way that doesn't invalidate other people and other factions? So it requires a lot of conversation, and generally I've been very approachable, I think, in this regard. I can say definitely RM is a very good example. I had a very good relations with RM, with the leader there, and we even have an event slotted in a few weeks. So generally, I'm very open. I really approach everyone whenever there's an issue, and I hope that people can approach me, and we can, deal with stuff like that. We even had a controversial meeting with the Outcasts, even as Corsairs, and that role play required me to kind of set up a working group with the Outcast leaders, and it was a very interesting experience.
So,
So yeah.
moving on, by the way, very quickly, tell us about the faction out in roleplay, like Deterrence. Why the name? And because of the name, like, what do they do in roleplay? What do they represent? Do they represent the whole of the Corsairs or a specific group? Like, what are your roles? What do you do? How do you fit in to the roleplay environment as Deterrence?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's important to kind of really distinguish NRP from ORP, and then after that, I could potentially talk about the out of role play situation, because that's a very, very important aspect. So NRP, I don't think I need to explain who the Corsairs are. Anyone that actually has played freelancers know that they're the largest criminal faction in the serious sector. They're kind of stretched out for living. They're known for attacks and raids on various transports and bases, so on and so forth. So for me, the way that I approach the NRP part of it is how do I really make a faction that is somewhat believable, it's somewhat realistic, and at the same time, how do I kind of pay attention to what is strong about the Corsairs and what's weak. So originally, so deterrence, by the way, is kind of a faction name that I've used for multiple projects. So it's not necessarily something that's born out of role play. But I mean, deterrence speak for itself, and that is a name from me which inspires strength and unity. Um, Generally, initial ideas that I had was to kind of have something similar to Reavers from Serenity. So something like really raidery, kind of nothing intelligent, let's say. But I looked at previous RP that was done, and for me, really, the Corsair kind of lacked the sophistication from vanilla. And for me, the perception of Corsairs in vanilla is that they're really smart. They're really people that are really tough, that have really strived to survive in a very tough environment. They're extremely good pilots, engineers. So that was kind of the most important take for me, and it was really kind of creating a faction that actually makes sense within the realms. So the first thing that I looked at is how can I make like a faction profitable, right? Because in order for you to be, let's say, believable in an RP perspective, is you need to have the financial stability in order to do so. And realistically, you don't really have a lot of options with Corsair. So one of the first thing was to kind of capitalize on the smugglings and the profit that Xeno relics and artifacts provide. And you can find in the background that you have reincarnation outpost, which was one of the first things that we did. So kind of for me was really the capitalization on having the funds, on having the economic background to actually function as a faction. Generally, the approach that I've taken for the faction was that I was looking for kind of let's say youth, or generally people that are kind of unhappy with the current regime. So we're looking at revolutionaries. We're looking at people that really want to change, a meaningful change, and really want to kind of make a name for themselves, and really want to put Corsairs forward. So after the kind of the initial take of getting the economy background set up, it was really a matter of doing what Corsairs do well, and that is raiding. So we launched a lot of raids in Bretonia in general. And then for me, the next step was really kind of to put our name and to really get partners in terms of the
Oh, I
overall.
actually just crashed, I think. But go on.
No worries. So generally, it was about kind of creating responsible partners, and order was the obvious natural choice. Um, so kind of making sure that we're allied, securing partners. We actually had a very controversial treaty, let's say, with the outcasts, and that was to kind of make a neutral zone here in that specific place, which kind of caught a lot of heat for that. But it's well known that actually when Corsairs and outcasts meet in space, at least in vanilla, while a battle may ensure, like, Corsairs and outcasts don't actually really hate each other. They're more like a competition. And so generally,
Oh, I could tell that I could hear the veteran players complaining since Outcasts still blame the Corsairs for the quote possible sabotage of the Hispania. But
absolutely, yeah.
the fact is, like, it has been really done to death so much that maybe at this point in time, what you just said does make sense. But that
Yeah,
remains to
it
be
was
seen.
definitely, just to be clear, it was definitely not. I'm not advocating that Corsairs and Outcasts should sing Kumbaya and become allies or anything like that. But it was just more of a. I don't see a reason why you should not attempt to roleplay with your enemies and maybe even fail. Similar, we also role-played with Coalition, and that was met with a lot of criticism as well. But for me, it was purely like I don't see a reason why you should not role-play with your enemies, because at the time, Outcast had a strong alliance with Core, and so I don't see why you could not roleplay. The enemy of my enemy is my friend for that specific time frame. And so, um, generally, I approach NRP in a sensible fashion. What really makes sense. So generally, we are progressive. We are kind of centralist, I would say, in terms of the approach that we take politically. A lot of interesting things were in terms of the code of Ravenna Nagash, because Ravenna Nagash is also a battle cry for us, and the character is basically kind of I won't say a religious leader, but there's definitely a code of personality going on. If I can draw a parallel, it's similar to kind of Caesar's Legion from Fallout New Vegas,
Yeah.
and the historical reason for that is that generally. You find in that societies that really have a tough, bleak environment, you will find that circumstances would most likely dictate that people band around a single strong leader. And so kind of this
Need
is
an anchor
the
point.
yeah, you need an anchor point. It's really almost impossible to kind of have a democracy, or and you will find it in political theory that democracy or oligarchy only works once you have, let's say, a strong middle class. And I just somehow I don't find that happening in Kursar's space. So yeah, so generally speaking, it was really to kind of make a strong cohesive faction that makes sense from an NRP perspective, and while respecting the traditional lore, I wanted to slightly deviate from discovery lore a little bit. Um, but I think we hit basically every narrative points from a vanilla Corsair perspective. If you have the Xeno relics, we're the main providers on the server right now of Xeno relics, due to our station and due to the smuggling that we do on a regular basis. If you want to talk about raids, again, that's a cultural and main narrative beat for Corsairs, and we've done a tremendous amount of raids. Both in Bretonia and in other areas in Rhineland as well. Um, and we're generally proud, and we want to put Corsairs first in terms of establishing a Corsair empire. So long term our goal is to actually establish a strong cohesive empire within the realms and the constraints of the story, and potentially even one recognized by maybe a singular lawful group like Kusari, for example, comes to mind. But we'll see how long it takes a long time to get to that stage.
All
So that's
right.
kind of the main beat.
Okay, so that was your roleplay setup. So let's take a step back and take a look at the faction from an out of roleplay perspective, especially in the terms of your current player base. Let's quickly answer the standard question. What kind of player is Deterrence for? New player, obviously, in this case. But what kind of players are you actively seeking right now that you have become established? Because I'm pretty sure that if I had asked you this when you first started, and if I ask you now, I would get two completely different answers. So would you like to see more players who do PvP, or do you want like narrative-driven players who love writing and storytelling and stuff like that? Like, what are you currently looking for? Like what kind of player would find deterrence interesting? Those are, I suppose, those are two different questions. What
Yeah.
kind of player would find deterrence interesting? And at the same time, what kind of player Deterrence currently lacks?
I mean, it's an interesting question. So, and I think those two are kind of you'll get to different answers. So fundamentally, I really wanted to make a faction that's kind of fun for people, and I don't mean necessarily from an RP perspective, right? I
Yeah.
really mean that I wanted to create a community, and also maybe that's a big distinction. I'm not here to just make a freelancer group. I'm actually here to make a strong cohesive community, and a community that plays other games other than freelancers. So what kind of people do DTR wants? The answer would be anyone, as long as you are an individual that's not toxic, that you respect the community, that you want to do something, to build something, and to have some fun with us. This is the right fit. Uh, Speaking strictly from freelancer perspective, I really don't care whether the person has 10 years of experience on 5 or 5. I generally really respect that people are different, and I really want to utilize exactly that difference, because DTR wasn't built from a single person. Even myself, I provided a model and I provided the structure, the goal, the ideas. But DTR is also a conglomerate of many people who have put a lot of resources, a lot of ideas themselves, a lot of work into becoming what we are. And for me, really, the integral part of being a good leader is actually utilizing the people correctly, utilizing their potential, and utilizing how they can achieve their goals.
So, for
So
example, if I, just for the sake of example, people understand your group as a raiding group, as a, smuggling group. For example, someone who really likes to do forum roleplay or writing in general comes along, then you are basically going to give him that possibilities. Like, oh, you like writing here. do this, or it's like, oh,
Absolutely.
you want you don't really care for the role play aspect, you just really want to do, shooting. You will just give them that opportunity, right?
Absolutely. So, and this has to do with the way that our ORP structure is set up. So, I think first of all, it's important to know that when we're working, we like to work hard. But if people are looking for like a hardcore group with multitude, let's say, coordinated strike teams or rigid hardcore RP requirement, that's simply not us. Our members can come and they go as they please, and they do. But we basically always have a multitude of things that they can do. But one of the first things in DTR is real life is always first. And I'm very committed to this because a lot of us are in their 30s with partners, with families, with kids. You don't really have the time to really commit to something 24/7. Maybe
Yeah.
some people do, but they're the minority. They're usually young people who are just kind of in high school, and we have some of those, of course. But to answer your question, first of all, I wanted to really strip the onboarding experience from all the clunkiness that other groups do. Forum and forum code are completely optional. Ship restriction doesn't exist with us. I really wanted to kind of make the onboarding experience as much fun and as efficient as possible. So all it takes to become a full member is obviously learning the basics like rules, role play, and how to be a community member, right? Because if you have somebody that doesn't respect the rules, or you have somebody that doesn't can't even do the modicum of role play, it's very difficult to be a community member. But I wanted to strip away the unfun bits, and then after that is you have a lot of different kind of streams within DTR. And so, for example, just to give you an idea, so we have Academy Sergeant, and that's a role which basically helps with the onboarding. So these people are people that are usually more sociable. These are people that are kind of more
Charismatic.
charismatic, as you rightfully pointed out. They have kind of a desire to help out new people, and that's not always somebody, right? So
Yeah.
these people are generally also the kind of people that also get they have the option to become part of our management system as well. Then you have the drill instructors, and drill instructors are very PvP oriented kind of people. They're there to teach anyone that actually wants to become good in
Mechanically
PvP.
knowledgeable. Yeah.
Exactly, you put it right on the money. And then we have logistics. So logistics are people that generally are very much interested in the pub mechanic of the game. So anything that has to do with base management, anything that has to do with DTR needing its various, because we have probably more than 10 pops right now, which are
Mhm.
very difficult to manage. So anything that has to do with that system or that gameplay mechanic, these are the people. And we have a lot of people that are interested in purely player base mechanics. And then worth mentioning is that we have an entirely separate faction, which is called the New Horizon Industries, and they are people, they're freelancers that trade. So even though you cannot do trade on deterrence, you can actually do that on NHI, which is also ours actually. So another thing worth mentioning is the Scimitar company, which is primarily based of people. They want to do PvP and they want to do role play and story. And so, to answer your question from before, right? What would you do as a person who wants to do PvP and wants a really strong RP narrative? You join the Scimitar company. Um, so generally speaking, you kind of have a something. I basically tried from an ORP perspective to have to capture every gameplay point and to make sure that we can
And
capture
that
players.
even by itself
Yeah.
is very, very different from what we usually see in these factions, because I'm gonna tell you right now, we had an abundance of groups like DTR back in the day, like very, very back in the day. They accepted everyone, they actively sought out everyone, and they tried to provide as much, experience for their players as possible. The clunkiness that you mentioned about, ship restrictions, roleplay restrictions, being focused specifically in roleplay or specifically in PvP, that was honestly the knee-jerk reaction Disco had to these huge over-encompassing groups. People said, you know what, I want to do X that they also do, but I want to do it like very properly, like very, very specialized. So
Right.
that is where the clunkiness happens. It's just that those groups are currently the only surviving ones because they attract loyalty and very, very, very niche within niche sort of thing. So having DTR pop back up and provide this over encompassing, like very, very broad appeal, especially for new players who these over specialized groups might seem as clunky and strange and they don't feel as friendly is honestly what disco probably needs these days.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I find it that really the central points or the pillars for me for people to really stay and to be engaged is that first of all you respect their free time. Again, you really cannot survive long if you're in your 20s, in late 20s, 30s, if you have like hardcore demands from people.
Yeah.
Free time is a luxury, especially in the times that we live in. And the second thing is really not to restrict people in what they can do, and to kind of again, as a leader, for me it's integral that I utilize the people that I have in a way that first of all is productive for the group, and second is also inherent to their actual desires.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, I can create the Shakespearean type of novel about how great DTR is from a role play perspective. It's an amazing text to read, an amazing story, and then the ORP, like nobody enjoys it.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, that's human nature, and really for me, the process in DTR captures human nature, and we've taken that even with the management of the group itself, because my role is essentially a role of an exec. I basically gather all the input and I make a decision based on what I see as the best solution for any daily problem we have. But we have our conclave and we have our mid-management group, which is made of subject matter experts. So at any point of time when we consider changes in the group, we're very agile in the approach that we take. So, for example, um, we have Fab, and Fab is currently pushing our elite company, which is a scimitar of PvP-oriented people. We have Bonsai, we have Carlotta, we have Jugara, who are drill instructors, and they really kind of push different aspects of the group. You have, let's say, Thomas. You have what was his nickname? Pleasurization, I think it was his nickname. But basically, Lawrence is his actual name, and he pushes the logistics aspect of it. And then even our conclave. So our conclave is basically our ruling body. And in a nutshell, while I'm the exec type of figure, we don't really have a real democracy, as in the sense that I can always veto and I can always push my decisions if it came to it.
Yeah.
It's kind of a dictatorial almost, but at the same time,
It just
no.
works.
Yeah, obviously, democracy doesn't work when you wanna. There is a reason why most corporations use this style of executive, who really pushes kind of the drives the organization, and this has worked very
Yeah,
well.
because you need a goal. You need to you need to have a set goal, and it's easier to have like one person set the goal, but have
Exactly.
enough leeway and flexibility to allow players to the executive players to actually figure out how to achieve it.
Absolutely, and
This is
so
this is actually like this is turning out to be first of all, this is turning out by far the longest interview that I've had these like out of all of them. But this is interesting because due to the way that you work, due to the way that deterrence works in general, first of all, we have already binned the regular faction interviews bullet points because it's different. Like we usually have factions that are, for example, really really roleplay centric, and they can talk a lot about their roleplay exploits and everything else. But this is a community. This is a conglomerate of players that use Deterrence as a platform to do either POB or raiding or roleplay writing or it's a different sort of beast, and I'm really glad that this is turning out to be such a such an interesting interview. But
it's definitely different. Yeah.
that being said, we do need to start wrapping up a little bit. So do tell me, do you want to cover one more topic, like anything that you didn't see in the interview, bullet points that I provided? Because again, we are going off script here, but do tell, like, is there anything you want to address?
So generally, I really want to kind of highlight the prevailing thought process that's currently happening, and that is that you really need to be a good role player. You need to be really a good PvPer to kind of survive in this game. I think that we really kind of need to look into the new player experience here. It's worth mentioning that again, like DTR is really focused on new players, and I think this is kind of the honestly the kind of the prevailing mindset that we need to push through all organizations really, because at the end of
Yeah,
the day, discovery is not what it used to be, right? I
of
mean, this
course.
sense of exploration is not there yet, and that's partly due to the mechanics that we've had, changed. So, for example, now you can just simply restart the game, right? And you can
Yeah,
come anywhere you want to, which is historically, as mentioned, not the case, right? The sense of exploration is really not there. The sense of discovery is not there because you can instantly show up in Omicron Gamma with the server commands, right? And that has led to a different sort of, let's say, set of
ecosystem.
challenges, right? An ecosystem entirely, right? Because when before there was a sense of exploration, that is now gone with the commands system. When
It was always
previously,
interesting. It was always interesting. I distinctly remember when I used to be a completely new player. I obviously hang around Liberty because, well, that was literally where I was. But I would look at the server chat and I see these masses of people sitting on in alpha and gamma. And I remember thinking to myself, "Where is that? What is happening there?" And the fact that I couldn't just go there, it was an adventure when I finally got to do that. So I'm not saying that we should probably do that, but I do agree with you. Like some of the FL hook commands have taken just a little bit of discovery away from us, but well, it is what it is. One more thing I really want to appreciate here is that we have had specific groups who specifically specialized in the new player experience. We had the Angels, for example. They were literally players whose job it was to do it, but it existed in a vacuum, that it was
yeah,
literally all they did. But here we have a freaking big player faction that utilizes a specific ID, which is not a freelancer, not a generic ID, but is actually a themed ID. But at the same time, they are offering this sort of integration of like give new players something to hold onto and explore disco through, and I think that this is something that we really have lacked in the last 5 years or so. And I'm really
I
glad that
agree.
DTR exists.
No, I think it's very important, and again to come back to my point, I think this approach needs to be taken by every group because as the mechanics have changed, you really can very quickly run out of things to do. And when you really quickly run out of things to do because of the mechanics that have changed, then it's up to the individual groups to kind of make the difference. Because at the end of the day, you stay for the community and you stay for the people that
Oh,
you
yeah.
play with. Um, so really, I really want to highlight, and again, the tremendous support that I've received, from Sunset, who's my second in command, from Eingar, who's my third in command, from Buck, Caridon, Vladimir, Kreutz, Moot. These are all people that are individuals that really, and this is exactly it. Like DTR encompasses these specific people. So Eingar is amazing when it comes to rules and lore and ship knowledge. Buck is amazing when it comes to pop and economy. Caridon is a pilot ace. He's extremely good in PvP. Vladimir is kind of the focuses on the well-being of our faction. Kreutz is the voice of DTR and the passion of DTR, and also tremendous recruiter as well. And Moat is our lore and history expert. So it's really important that you empower your individuals, right? It's not about creating a faction that's really specialized. It's about creating a faction that specializes in empowering its people. And I think that's kind of the final call out of what I consider important in Discovery to revitalize this place. Um, Kind of what I think it's lacking, really. You have these really ultra specialized groups, which are they're not almost in care, like they're really not focusing on the community as a whole and the health of the server. They're focused kind of on
Their
each
own
each
thing.
again. Yeah, there's no I'm not saying that that's bad in a nutshell. I'm just saying that factions, particularly official factions, should be more interested in the new player experience, because at the end of the day, if you don't have any new players, then the server dies, and it's as simple as that. So yeah.
All right. And I think this is pretty much where we can leave off for now. All right. Yeah.
Thank you
This
very
is
much for having me. I appreciate it.
yeah, wow. I really, really did not expect this sort of thing. Like, I am completely sold on DTR. You sell your product perfectly well.
Thank you.
All right, ladies and
Appreciate it.
boys, this was Faction Interviews with Spazzy and Undertone, DTR, The Deterrence. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.